Hello, set apart saints. This is David, and as you may or may not know, I just published my Revelation Timeline Decoded book, which I've been working on for about 10 years, I guess. So, when I started studying 10 years ago, I got really frustrated with the explanations on YouTube, on websites. They just seemed really nonsensical. They weren't making a lot of it, a lot of fancy stories. Wasn't really connecting with me, and my gut was always telling me that there's just no way that all of Revelation, all the prophecies that Messiah wrote about in Revelation are about what would take place in the last few years, the last 7 years, as people say, or the last 3.5 years of Great Tribulation. And so I struggled with it and I prayed about it. The Spirit prompted me to look to the great theologians of the 16th through 20th century. When I did that, I found out that they were teaching the same historicist narrative of the fulfillment of the 7th week of Daniel and Revelation. And with one voice, they were proclaiming who is the Antichrist, who is the son of perdition, and who is the harlot of Revelation 17. So instead of all the scattered futuristic explanations from the people I was hearing from, here I found a consensus. All these people were saying the same thing. And what I found out is that the saints were teaching the same narrative for 500 years, since maybe the 16th century, when they were connecting the dots on prophecy and such. But it's only been during the last century or 2 centuries that really the false futuristic explanations have been pushed, and now are a stronghold. Now most people, including pastors who learn it at seminary, Dallas Theological and different seminaries, we're just permeated with these futuristic explanations. But when you read from these people, and I'm just going to go through a list, and this is a very low-tech video. If I go through PowerPoint and have to make presentations and stuff, these videos just won't get made. I have too much on my hands. I'm writing another book on Revelation that'll cover chapters 19 and 20, and then I have some other book ideas. So I'm just way too busy to make these things fancy, and this works really great for people who are just listening to an audio. So I'll just read it through. You can see it on your screen. In my book, I feature explanations from some of these great theologians. And this helps people see that the explanations in the book they're not just my interpretations, because people say that, well, that sounds nice, but that's just your interpretation. And so this, by citing these theologians, it gives the perspective to the saints. It shares the saints who have gone before us. It shares their perspective, so we can see that people have been saying the same thing for a lot of years. So as I go through the list, you may have never heard of them, but that's because the enemy has worked so hard to hide their witness. They wrote books. They wrote whole Bible commentaries, just like John MacArthur does today. That's what these people did back at a time where they didn't have computers, didn't have internet, didn't have anything. So their works are amazing. So in my Revelation Timeline Decoded book, I provide verse-by-verse explanations of the prophecies, and then I add the commentaries from these theologians, which give more information and back it up and reinforce it. The enemy has worked really, really hard to push aside the witness. And I pray that your goal is to seek truth and not to defend a belief. So in my book, I cite Henry Guinness, and I even include his picture in the book because I esteem him so highly. He wrote in the late 19th century, the futuristic deceptions were starting to take hold, and so he just poured out his heart and to try to counter that. So he wrote different books, The Approaching End of the Age, Romanism and the Reformation, which I highly recommend, Light for the Last Days, Key to the Apocalypse, and History Unveils Prophecy, another great book. So he did his best, to try to counter the futuristic explanations which were coming on the stage at that point. And so he's one of my heroes of the faith, just because I really consider him my pastor. Obviously, I've never met him, but I'll see him someday. And he's just taught me so much truth as I read through his, in-depth studies. And there's other people I'll point to. But again, he wrote to counter the futuristic prophecy fulfillment explanations, and he would be absolutely appalled at what the saints believe today. If he saw the state of affairs, he would cry, because we're just so deceived by the enemy. So what's amazing to me is these people, when you see their bios, wow. I mean, I think it's hard work to collect all this information, organize it in a book and all that. And I do it with the internet and with the computer and with access to the King James on, on my database and just copy and paste a lot of things. But these people did everything manually, and that just so speaks how brilliant they were and that they were spirit led. So one book you may or may not have heard of is by E.B. Elliott, and it's Hore Apocalypte, which means hours with the apocalypse. And yeah, it took him hours because it's the most elaborate work ever produced on Revelation. There's 2,500 pages in the volumes, and he has 10,000 references to back it up of other works from people, whether it's Edward Gibbon, the historian, or different references to back it up. I mean, just again, 1844. All of this was done manually. I just can't even fathom that kind of work. But, the challenge is, as great as the work is, and as much as I appreciate it, most people aren't going to read it. You're not going to read 2,500 pages. So what my role has been is to take things like what he wrote and put it into a concise format. So you can see the best of what he said without having to read the whole explanation of 4 volumes. In my book, I reference Roman Empire authority historian Edward Gibbon. And he wrote an epic 6-volume work called The History and Decline of the Fall of the Roman Empire. He was not a believer, but he was used to document what took place in the Roman Empire, which it was obvious that the Spirit used him because he started his narrative with what was taking place after John wrote Revelation. So he started his narrative basically when the Roman Empire was at its height of power, when it was conquering. And that's the symbolism of the first seal. And he took it through about the 16th century, but that's shortly after the 6th trumpet, which was the Turks being released to go attack the Eastern Roman Empire, to attack the walls of Constantinople, to knock them down, to kill many Orthodox Christians who were worshiping Mary. They were apostate, so it was a judgment. So his narrative, though he didn't know it, serves to take us through the first seal, through the 6th trumpet, which is absolutely amazing. So we have without his work, it would be hard to see. It would be hard to know everything that took place in the Roman Empire during that time, so we can see the fulfillment of prophecy. I'll scan through this list, but I'll give you a list of Bible commentaries that were written by these esteemed theologians. Their extensive writings give profound insight into the fulfillment of prophecy. They expounded on scriptural truth to prove out the historical fulfillment of prophecy without the enemy's deceptions clouding their minds. In other words, the enemy's deceptions, they weren't really around during the 16th century, 17th century. They were created then, but nobody accepted them. Everybody rejected them because they were made-up fabrications from the Jesuits of Rome, who created them to deflect blame away from the Antichrist Pope. So, I mean, these theologians, they don't agree on every single thing, but they have the same historical narrative. So there's Albert Barnes, American theologian, went to Princeton. He wrote Notes on the Whole Bible, so a commentary on the whole Bible. Back then, 19th century, sold more than 1 million volumes of that were printed out and distributed, which is amazing. And so obviously it's extremely well known, but today, when do you hear anybody referencing Albert Barnes' Notes on the Bible, right? He also wrote a book just on Revelation called Notes on the Handbook of Revelation, which is 506 pages, and it's really small text. I mean, he gives you the verse on the top and then just a whole lot of explanation in small text. Then there's hardly any paragraph breaks. It makes you dizzy reading it, right? So, really one of my roles, if you will, is to take the best of what Albert Barnes said and put it in my book, right? Because most people aren't going to read a 500-page book of small text. It's just not going to happen. But they'll read something that's more to the point, hopefully easier to understand with a lot of white space in it to make it easy to read. But I love Albert Barnes. Just great mentor to me. Adam Clark, So Adam Clarke, Methodist theologian, biblical scholar, he wrote a whole Bible commentary. It took him 40 years to complete it. And it was a primary resource for 2 centuries, right? He wrote it back in 1830, somewhere in there. It was considered the most comprehensive commentary on the Bible ever prepared by one man. But have you ever heard of it? And I'm not demeaning you if you have not. I'm just saying it's all been hidden. You don't hear these great theologians giving you the explanation of the fulfillment of, well, the Bible in general, but Revelation in detail, telling you the truth, telling you who's the Antichrist, telling you who's the harlot. Yet, you don't hear people talking about these names, these esteemed theologians who gave us the truth. Geneva Bible Study, or Geneva Study Bible. So back in the 16th century, the Protestant reformers, the Bible was out, but then they included in that Bible, just like a John MacArthur Study Bible today, they included their notes, and that included notes from Calvin, Knox, Coverdale, other reformers. And it was a great translation. It was based on the right manuscripts, and it was the most widely read Bible back in the 16th, 17th century. And really, the King James kind of took its place. But one of the great losses of the King James is that the study notes weren't included. So we lost that valuable resource of the reformers telling you, again, who is the Antichrist, who's the harlot, what's the fulfillment of the seals, what's the fulfillment of the trumpets. They told you all this. It's all right there. They told you the fulfillment of the 7th book of Daniel in the Geneva Study Bible. So here's George Stanley Farber, Anglican theologian, wrote many books, dissertation on the prophecies, dissertation relative to the great period of 1260 years of the papacy, the reign of Antichrist, back in the early 19th century. James Aiken Wiley, The Seventh Vial, was an invaluable book to me. Another book, The Papacy, Its History, Dogmas, Genius, and Prospects. Another book he wrote is called The Jesuits, Their Moral Maxims and Plots Against Kings, Nations, and Churches. Wrote it in the 19th century, telling you exactly what a Jesuit represents, telling you who is the Antichrist, the false prophet, and the harlot church. Jameson Fawcett Brown commentary. It's a 1-volume commentary prepared by these men back in the 19th century. So it's giving you the explanations, but again, I'm just, I don't want to be redundant, but have you heard of these people? Because nobody promotes them. So unless you are aware of them, to look them up, to read their work, you don't know. John Gill. Wow, John Gill. What can I say about John? John, who, is an English Baptist pastor, as you can see on your screen, 51 years, biblical scholar. He wrote Exposition of the New Testament in 3 volumes and the Old Testament in 6. John... I love John, but John, he will make an explanation and tell you 5 things that it's not. So when he's making an explanation, he'll give you 5 things that it's not, and he'll tell you what it is. And that's awesome because he does away with all the fluff, all the false explanations. He says, no, it's not this. No, it's not this. No, it's not this. Here's what it is. And you really, he's wordy, but he's always worth the read. That's what I can proclaim about him. Back in the 18th century, he wrote a whole Bible commentary. Joseph Benson, commentary on Revelation. So he was a Methodist minister. John Wesley promoted him in his school as a theologian, teacher. Just studied zealously, and it shows up in his commentary on Revelation in the early 19th century, and I cite him in the book extensively. Has great insight. Matthew Poole, English Annotations on the Holy Bible. So, wow, 17th century nonconformist theologian, which I totally love that title because I'm a nonconformist theologian. I don't conform to the standard teachings of what pastors are teaching. So he wrote his English Annotations on the Whole Bible, completed by him and other people that helped him, in 2 volumes back in the 17th century. The People's New Testament by Barton Johnson. He wrote he has the same kind of mentality as me, I guess. He wrote it for the novice student. So I think, I like to believe that the Revelation Timeline Decoded book gives a verse-by-verse explanation, so it's given the depth for a more advanced student to see the fulfillment, but it's presenting it in such a way that's not over your head. So it's It's really designed for someone that's just coming along and has just started. It's just giving you the facts, which is me to a T, right? So the pulpit commentary, written in the 20th century, 23 volumes, 22,000 pages, 9,500 entries, references. Over 100 authors over a 30-year span assembled this commentary set. That's valuable. But my Baptist and my Calvary Chapel pastors and any pastors that I've heard online, Chuck Swindoll, David Jeremiah, all those people, they have never mentioned any of these people to me. Never. It's just about their explanations. Oh, right. So there's more great commentaries from esteemed theologians. You can look them up, but that gives you a sample of their work. And like I said, they taught a very different explanation of the fulfillment of Revelation than is what is given by pastors today. So the enemy has created many false prophecy, deceptions to fool the end-time saints, to hide the identity of the Antichrist and the false prophet. So as your brother, lovingly admonish you to read the book, compare the explanations with Scripture, and pray about it. Read the explanations from the saints who have gone before us about the historical fulfillment, because the enemy has pushed their witness aside, and we need to hear it. We need a refresh. We need to look to the testimony, the witnesses of the saints, the great theologians who have gone before us, who taught truth, and it's been pushed aside. And we need to, my goal of the book is to bring it back to the forefront, that people are reading this and seeing it and seeing the collective witness of it. So I pray for a great awakening in these end times, to bring their testimonies back to life, to expose the deceptions of the enemy and set the captives free, because that's our role. We were absolutely called to do this, to play this role, to bring down the power of the enemy. I will include a link to the book in the description. If you want to order a copy of the book, it's a print. I love print because I like marking things up and having a hard copy in case the grid goes down or whatever, but it is in Kindle format too. You can access printable, in book I reference a Revelation fulfillment chart. You can print that out. And then there's other study PDFs which you can save and print out to help you with your study. But the chart's going to help you visualize the fulfillment of Revelation. So please like the video if it helped you. Subscribe to the channel if you've not done so you'll be alerted to new videos as I publish them, because I'm going to go through, I think I flagged about 20 different topics that I cover in my book that I'm going to address in videos little by little. So we'll go through this. We'll step through it. Hopefully it's making more sense for you. Love you guys, and I will talk to you soon.